lero akumangoti BP yanga yakwera azibambo azimayi ana agogo onse kumangoti BP yanga yakwera.
The black man was born in chains. You can hear them from the ship and harbor. The clings and the clangs of shackles on necks and ankles as he shuffles across the wooden floor. His body written freedom.
Nothing our integrity is in our character. The essence of our intelligence rivals to the silence that doesn't make sense. But I'm not guilty.
Poverty is a registered trademark of most African countries. It is also a state of mind. Mind the gap, a caution. Mind is a concept constituted by conscious experience and intelligent thought. Thought leads to action, hence is suppressed by oppressive regimes. Regime is a word that originated from the French. French are the people of France who overthrew an absolute monarchy in 3 years.
You stand still on the podium. The audience claps to the questions. You don't know why. Are they clapping because they get the story behind? Or maybe they are clapping simply because you...
She lies silently beneath him and pretends not to feel the pain, believing that this is the most love she'll ever get from anyone. She tells no one. No one is there to listen. So she suffers in silence.
Spoken word poetry is one among diverse forms of art in Malawi. Over the years, poetry has grown to create an environment for expression among the young and the old. I personally take on the journey to explore what this unique art form is doing for the young people in the country, ranging from concerts to art festivals, movements, and art spaces. Young people have found themselves engaging in different conversations artistically, using poetry as a tool, creating well-known inspiring voices along the way. Among them is one inspirational voice, well known as Q Malawi.
I would take my time to win over the rights to your ring finger. 5 centuries to be exact.
I start my journey by visiting the Kwaharaba Art Gallery in Blantyre, a city where art seems to have found its ground for exposure. So I am right here at the Kwaharaba Art Gallery Center in Blantyre, where most of the poets usually meet up every Wednesday evening from 6 p.m. But today specifically, I'm meeting up with 2 young poets, Rodwell Lumbe and Rabi Godowe. So they're going to be telling me a little bit about what they do as spoken word poets here in Malawi. So let's go meet Rodwell and Rabi Godowe.
Hi.
I hear that you do both traditional and English spoken word poetry. Why traditional spoken word poetry?
I started poetry in 2011 and I'm working on my first album, which is scheduled to come out in November this year. I'm really biased towards the traditional poetry because I love to uplift my culture. I love to speak traditional stuff to the young urban boys who are growing up in our generation.
So it seems like today there are a lot of young people who have discovered the poetic side of themselves, and they're usually based on the English aspect of it. Do you feel that there are challenges that you face as maybe a Chichewa spoken word poet in a time like this?
Well, yeah, that's actually true. Like in the past, poetry was like static, I should say, and then all of a sudden it's on the rise. But then we have more English poets than the Chichewa poets. As Chichewa poets, we have challenges, as you say. For example, since most poems that are aired out, that are recorded or published are in English, so as a Chichewa poet, for you to go out there and deliver the message, there is no really that audience that used to be there, like back in the days. So it's really challenging today as a Chichewa poet. And then there are some platforms that are set, like in most urban centers, it's the poems that are delivered are mostly English poems and Chichewa poems. So yeah, it's really challenging for a Chichewa poem these days.
So do you feel that this is strictly about maybe the age that we're in today, or people who just lost maybe their cultural identity, mostly the young people, since they're being exposed to a lot of social media and maybe adapting to the characters of spoken word poets they see at an international level? What exactly do you think are some of the factors affecting poets to be driven towards the English aspect of spoken word poetry today?
Yeah, that's actually right. I think it's more of the social media. Like almost every young people now has access to the internet, and so it's the language and then the social media that is affecting the Chichewa poetry that like used to be there in the day. So people are much more interested in the kind of poetry that they see on the internet, and which has been there in Malawi like for ages now. So yeah, it's the social media, and then the culture is being eroded away because of Western culture. So yeah, we're trying to take after that, and in the process losing our own.
Do you feel that there is a future for more traditional, let me say, Chichewa spoken poets?
There is actually hope for Chichewa poets, like in the near future, if we only work harder than we used to, and then like this generation, we can sensitize this generation, we can reach out to this generation and let them know that they are losing their own culture. Like they shouldn't be taken over by the Western culture or any other culture that is coming. In the process, they should also reflect on who they are and where we are coming from as a people. So yeah, there is hope. There is hope.
After quite an interesting conversation with Rodwell, we take our time to view the eye-catching paintings created by Malawian artists. These paintings seemingly have their own stories to tell.
Never tried. They missed the moon in rented rooms, traded stories over food. I worked alone, broke my bones with all my pride.
Robbie Kondowe, on the other hand, is another young artistic soul who shares his views on spoken word poetry with me.
Define poetry as a spoken word poetry precisely as one way of venting emotions and expressing oneself. And I think it's a very imperative tool where one could actually use that and try to convey a message out there. I feel like it's well, first of all, people always say that I'm a political type of poet, but that's not true. The thing with my poetry is that I try to speak of things that society don't like to speak about, and I think it's very important for poets to actually have that kind of impact and that type of way of conveying messages, because I feel like most of people in this society, they're scared to speak what's on their mind. So I feel like poetry is one of the most imperative tools where one, especially a young man like me, can use to convey whatever I feel like saying. I think it's important. So like I say, I don't like to brand myself as a political poet, but rather I would say that type of poet who likes to say social consciousness. I should put it that way. So like I already said, that most people are scared to talk about very important things like touchy subjects, like maybe speaking something to do with rape. I understand that rape is a very touchy subject in Malawi, so it's one of the things that we need to address. So I hope that with coming up with poems that maybe focus on such areas, I think we can open up a dialogue in this country and maybe actually say something. And I think the biggest challenge that I would say is platform. Of course, one would argue that people now are coming up with several platforms where poets can actually go there and express themselves. For instance, for Haraba, every Wednesdays we do have spoken word or poetry. But then I feel like we still have a long way to go as poets and actually be known that this is a poet, this is what he does. The other thing is, I think now that I would say it's quite a great thing that we have so many young poets coming up, so many budding poets coming up. But at the same time, I feel like some of those are just doing it for the sake of doing it. It's just like a train that this one is a poet, let me just do this thing as well. So I think we're lacking that, that balance where we can actually say that I want to be a poet full time and actually make money out of this. So I think that's also the biggest challenge, that most poets out there are not taking this thing seriously in terms of making business out of this and making a career out of this. I think you actually agree with me that most poets in the country, they're not full-time poets, they do other things as well. It's one way of having social income. So that's the biggest challenge, having too many poets coming up who don't actually want to be poets by the end of the day, and also not having that platform of actually being heard. Films in Malawi, I think it's a very young industry and still in its infancy, but I actually believe that it could be actually one of those industries where it can actually boom. And I mean, you look at, Q is a full-time poet, and things are actually working out for him. So us as young poets, I think that's the best example I could give, maybe to like follow in his footsteps as well. I think potential is there in terms of poetry because, for example, we have people like there's Minister Plume, these are the guys who are actually, making money out of poetry,
Inside, I wanted fame, 'cause I thought
From
fame
Blantyre, I
would
traveled to the
be
old capital
that
city of
I
Malawi, Zomba, to
never
meet
came.
another young female
Was a
voice in
failure
spoken word
to
poetry.
myself.
She is Pinduzaye Banda, a social science student at the Chancellor College.
Swallow me alive. The way of the world to swallow
The city
you
seems alive
alive.
with different structures coming up.
First.
There's a blissful feel to the environment, and the excitement for me starts to kick in. My journey to the old capital reveals to me some realities surrounding the young female voice and her perception of the poetry industry in the country.
I couldn't possibly still mean. I guess their lives, if they lost the truth they had. It's so hard to get well, writing postcards home from hell. I'd rather hide.
Hey Pindu, it's great to be here meeting you. Pindu, the spoken word poet. I want to know a little bit about that. Who is Pindu, the spoken word poet?
So that's a very hard question to answer. I'm a sad person, I guess. I'm just a human being, just a girl trying to express myself, basically. So, yeah, there really isn't that much to it, except me trying to express how I feel, mostly about specific issues and also about myself.
When did you discover yourself as an artist?
2014. I was feeling lost and needed a way to express myself, obviously. And so my uncle introduced me to spoken word poetry. I saw these people and how they were able to capture my emotions in their work, and I thought I could do that for someone. And I tried it, and people told me I was good, and here I am.
And so how has the experience been from the time you discovered yourself as a spoken word poet, and that you could actually use that tool, art, spoken word poetry, to express yourself? How has it been, and are there specific issues that you talk about in your poetry? Are there specific things that you talk about when you address in your poetry?
I do it, mostly I talk about activism for the empowerment of women and gender equality. as well as voicing out people's concerns, especially for people who've been abused, and just trying to break the silence around issues like that. I am very lucky to have had such a great support system. In fact, I met a lot of people in the industry who supported me as well, and so it hasn't been as much of a struggle to get myself established and to find spaces in which to express myself. And I feel like being relevant has helped in the sense that I've been able to mold my work in such a way that I can address whatever issues I need to at that given moment. And I appeal to people's emotions a lot, so I think that's different. Being able to be vulnerable on stage in that way really does have a different effect on people. Yeah. So for Malawi, in a society that's mainly conservative and with so many people who don't believe in sharing their experiences, where we've grown up thinking there's these issues that you can't talk about, these issues are taboo and you shouldn't be able to talk about them. Being able to break that silence is something that we should all be striving to do. We cannot continue to suffer in silence when we could learn from other people's experiences, and that's basically what I intend to do.
Do you have a specific poem that you feel has really touched a lot of lives out there, that has brought out the message that you intended to give, and a lot of people came back maybe with lessons or feedback?
Yeah.
Is there any poem?
My first poem, Silence, that did it, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
I cannot say how many times I've performed it. Yeah.
It's in the way she articulates the words during our conversation. This to me is a revelation of how art comes with passion and identity. One can clearly sense the energy and positivity of our surrounding.
I feel it's not as deep as it could have been, but maybe that's what appealed to people the most, the simplicity and how every issue I was trying to address was right there. And it spoke to a need that was present then and still is now, for us to break the silence. And everyone can relate to that, to growing up in a space where you cannot freely say how you feel, and you want to speak about these things, but you can't because you've grown up in a community where silence is what you're told to live by. And so finding your voice and being able to finally say that this is what's going on in my life, this is what troubles me, that appealed to a lot of people.
So maybe from a more personal perspective, to say we live in a society where young people's voices are not specifically prioritized, and they're not like on the front row. You hear political issues all the time, mainstream media, newspapers, magazines. How necessary do you feel it is for the Malawian young people to come out and speak about different issues, whether it's through art, whether it's through spoken word poetry, in as much as they can? How necessary do you feel it is for like the Malawian society?
It's maybe it's the most necessary thing right now. I think beyond getting funding for projects that are supposed to develop us and help people with the supposed issues that they have, we need to be able to speak out and actually express ourselves. And for a group that's the majority of the population in the country, we cannot sideline the youth. And we need to be able to speak about these things, especially from our perspective and how they affect us. For the longest time, we've had people assume what our problems are, assume these are the solutions that we need, but that's not always the case. When you talk to people and ask them what they want, they'll have totally different responses. And so we need to create an environment where from a young age people are able to express themselves, people are able to say openly what they feel needs to be done, what they feel is the problem, and what they need, basically. So, yeah.
So, any specific message you feel you would want to share with other young people out there concerning, maybe if it's not about art, or young people who specifically feel like they want to speak out about something but they don't have maybe the platform or the courage to do that? What message can you give to those people?
All I'm gonna say is speak. It seems like the most difficult thing before you start, and it still is. It doesn't get easy, but you need to remind yourself that there's never going to be a perfect moment. There's never going to be the perfect opportunity. There's never going to be the perfect environment for you to do what you want to do. I've met artists who didn't think they'd get anywhere, but they believed in themselves. They took that first step, and usually that's all it takes. Take that first step. There's always going to be people along the way who don't believe in you, who don't think you're able to do what you can do. And then there's going to be other people who want to support you, people who want to help you. And that's what you should be looking for. It would be such a greater environment, a greater space, if everyone believed in themselves and took that first step and did what they wanted to do, having believed in themselves. And so that's all I'm gonna say. That's what I started with. That's what a lot of my friends started with. And just have the courage to do it and move on from there. Every single day, just wake up, have that faith, have the trust in yourself, and speak poetry.
And while beautiful moments are worth treasuring, I had to head back to my city, Blantyre. But we surely cannot talk about poetry without having to perceive it from the eyes of its veterans. I am honored to have a conversation with one of Malawi's established writers and poets, Mr. Alfred Sadala. He welcomes me into his library at home, a place where he passes his time in the comfort of words and expression.
Poetry as such, before we actually even digress into spoken word or into something written. Because poetry is actually an oral representation. It's supposed to be an oral representation. Of course, it starts from a complex of a field. You have to be inspired, you have to be conceived. But in the main, poetry is supposed to be delivered loudly. So even this time that we are emphasizing on spoken word poetry, I would say that's pure poetry, because it even also augurs well with our background as Malawi, because we are actually coming from an oral tradition whereby all these were being publicized orally. It was, the print form is just an innovation that has actually come in from outside the country, maybe because of westernization. But otherwise, we are coming from an oral background, and this spoken word poetry is just some sort of underlining what we have all been doing, or what has our past been. So yeah, it's a revolution now just because it's so much blended into several artistic deliveries. But otherwise, poetry as such is supposed to be delivered orally. And it's, yeah, I wouldn't say that culturally there's been so much of a shift. No, I don't think so. It's actually still almost the same. Only that, as I've already alluded to earlier on, to say what has actually changed, I think it's actually the pattern of time. That the young men now are into it with a lot of several blends which have actually come in, especially when it comes to the actual delivery. They think even the rhythm has been, I would say, enriched, because it's so much of a song now in the presentation rather than just a mere blabber. And to the extent that it's so deep, it's drama, it's actually the hip hop type. So that's what actually has changed. But as far as the delivery is concerned, the same inspirations, the same conception are still ruling. And if anything, poetry actually emanates from a deeper psyche. And this is actually what is being delivered. But because of the influence of what has actually been as an in thing, most of them are actually being looked at it from that angle. There are times, most of the times I should say, I also take part in the actual delivery of spoken word poetry. And I would say that maybe I have maintained what I am or what my style is because I still believe, and this is what actually should be with each and everybody else who is actually doing it in this trade, to say that you have to be original. You don't have to be a copycat. You have to be original. The way you've been delivering your poems, even if it changes, it must still be there, and it can only be appreciated because that's almost a brand that you're attached to. So the actual issue of the spoken word poetry, I wouldn't say it has changed, because all of us are supposed to deliver it in a manner that reflects our being, not necessarily to say, okay, let me do as Wokomatani does. No. Let's actually look in the way that you feel contented and that the delivery is, you feel that the delivery is successful. That's actually how I would say about it.
Thank you.
Poetry is a unique feature of literature and a unique feature of expression, because I've already, I think I've actually mentioned somehow to say that what we express in poetry is actually what has actually engulfed us, what we have actually been going through, and it actually reflects our insight, our what we are actually are, and we are just trying to interpret. Even there are times that people look at you, even through your behaviors, they would judge you and say, okay, this person is this and that and that and that. But with poetry, it's just a fulfillment of what you are. So poetry as such, in fact, sorry to say, because I think this is where a lot of people do not really understand. Poetry is in almost each and every human being. It's just a matter of the magnitude of delivery that matters. Even in our behavior, even our normal lives, there's a lot of poetry that oozes out of such, such a behavior. So it's something that when it comes to say, I'm going to perform publicly with an intention to perform, that's when it's called poetry. But otherwise, even our daily lives, we also behave that poetic way. And each and every human soul is poetic in a manner. Somehow, it's just that particular situation where you can assemble and say, can I tell you this, or let me do this and that. But otherwise, we are all in the realm of poetry.
With most stories to tell concerning poetry in Malawi, the young artists I interacted with seem to have found a home in their artistic environment, a place where their voices are heard and not suppressed.